I don't know about you, I love this time of year. I have to tell you, I love it and I hate it. I hate the fact, in one sense, that it's so busy. Anybody else busy right now? It is so busy. Evidently, none of you are busy. That's incredible. I don't know how that's... Tell me your secret. We've got kids going into school, starting schools. Churches operate kind of on a school semester, and so we're gearing up for everything right now, and so it's just incredibly busy. But I do have one thing I love. I love this time of year, football. I love football. I just do. And I saw a thumbs up back there. You're an Eagles fan. We won't talk about this. So any Eagles fans here? I'll just ask innocently. Yeah. Now you're awake. So I'm a Cowboys fan. Some of you just decided that this isn't the church for you. That's okay. It's all right. I get it. You can still come for lunch. Maybe you'll find other people that you like. Right? But I love this time of year because football is going to start, but it's kind of great because it hasn't actually started. Because right now my hopes are very high. How about you? It's before the season, and whatever your team is, you're like, my quarterback is going to be great. And my coach is going to be better than I thought. And the team's going to rally. They're going to be fantastic. And I'm just kind of hoping that somehow, against all odds, and then the season starts and reality sets in, right? Now you're faced with reality that quarterback, not so much. That coach, we don't want to talk about it. And we play in the NFC East, people. It's not a great place, not a good division, okay? See, when we think about reality checks, typically we think of them in the negative, don't we? We think, okay, we have these high hopes, and then somebody comes along and they go, hey, reality check, and they pull the rug out from under us. Reality check, this is not as great as you think it is. Reality check, you're not as great as you think you are. Reality check, things are not going as well as you hoped. But what I want to talk about this morning is a different kind of reality check. Because instead of talking about a reality check that is negative, I want to give you and remind you of a reality check that is so positive it should blow your mind. See, the reality is that God exists. And the reality is that God has created the world, He's created you, and He knows you. And see, I tell you, I look around in the world right now, and I listen to a lot of Christians talking on social media and different, articles and essays and so forth. And I got to tell you, it concerns me because so many Christians are looking at the world, and they seem really in despair, and they seem discouraged, they seem hopeless. And it comes out in their tone and their attitude and the way they respond to other people. And I have to tell you, I don't totally get it. I mean, I kind of get it because the world's messed up. We'll talk about this next week. I'm just going to be honest. The world, broken, messy place. Yes, can we all agree on that? And yet, reality check, God. I shouldn't have to say anything else. And the reality check is, if God exists, then it completely shifts the paradigm of how we understand the world in which we live. And so while I kind of understand why, hey, listen, the world can be a scary place, I get discouraged, I get depressed at times when I look around, and yet, if God exists, this should change everything for us. If God exists, let me just be real clear. If God exists, if you believe that God exists, then you know that your life has meaning and purpose. If God exists, you know there is nothing that is ultimately hopeless about anything. I mean, the world, what we know is that what we're experiencing right now, like as bad as it might get, and let's just be honest, we're not experiencing anything all that bad right now, just to be really clear. Let's talk early church persecution, then we can talk about bad, okay? So what we're experiencing, we're just like getting a little bit of it. Jesus says these are like birth pangs for a pregnant mom. What ends at the end of pregnancy? New life. See, that's the hope. And so there's this part of me, when I'm reading these articles, I'm listening to these voices, there's a part of me that wants to be like, is there not a God in heaven? Because I sure thought there was last time I checked. So how are we responding to the world like this? It's confusing to me, I got to tell you. It's concerning to me. And so as we're heading into the fall, I just thought, man, I want to stop. And this is for me, it's always for me, okay? Not to be selfish, but it's always for me. But I think maybe all of us could benefit from the reminder, the reality check that God exists. And we're going to talk about all these different realities that I think we need to be reminded of, because it should transform our minds, and then it should change our lives. And I think we need that right now. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to start right there, that God exists. Because if God exists, it should change everything about how we see the world. And yet, I will tell you, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's ever been more difficult to believe in God. I mean, in our society right now, it is incredibly difficult to believe in God. There is an air of spiritual disbelief, of skepticism. And maybe there's other places where they're literally outlawing belief. Maybe it's even harder there. But within our society right now, it is far easier, and this has kind of become the narrative, that to believe in God is childish. Right? It's like bedtime stories that you would tell your kids. It's the things that you learn in Sunday school, but then you grow out of them. Listen, I wrestle with this all the time because it gets really awkward in my line of work because inevitably I meet someone and they go, oh, so why'd you move to New Jersey? Oh, for my job. What's your job? I'm a pastor. Awkwardness right there, and it's so funny because then people start telling you, I used to go to church. That's not helping right now, or my favorite is like, I've got this uncle, he goes to church. I'm thrilled for you, man. That's really, they're like trying so hard to make this connection that doesn't exist. So, right, but it's like they look at me like Sasquatch, or the lock. And I had this person one time, we were talking, and he said, so wait a minute, you're a pastor. I said, yeah. And he goes, so you believe in God? It's like, yeah. I mean, it blew his mind. He couldn't even wrap his head around it. He just couldn't believe that someone who seemed, I think, intelligent and, reasonably so, and reasonably well-adjusted would believe in God. And so it's become so difficult, I think. I think there's this pressure that pushes us away from God. There's an air of disbelief and skepticism that we live in and we breathe it in all the time. It's a contested belief, as Charles Taylor calls it. And so when I look at Acts 17, and because this is where the Apostle Paul, he is talking to some of the brightest people in his day. These are philosophers in Athens, and he gives them a speech, but he engages in dialogue and debate with them, and he wants to tell them, listen, I know you have all these other beliefs and all these other theories and all these other gods, but I want to tell you about this God, and he exists, and you can know him. So just to give us some context here, in Acts 17, and then starting at verse 16. This is while Paul, remember Paul, he's the apostle, he's like the first missionary, he's going around, he's telling everybody about Jesus. While Paul was waiting for them, this referring back to Silas and Timothy, they were some of his buddies, they would go on these journeys, but they've gotten separated. And so Paul was waiting for them in Athens. He was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Now, in Paul's day, Athens, of course, was the cultural, intellectual epicenter of the world. It was like the New York or the London of its day. I mean, this is where anybody who was somebody would come, unless politics, that would be Rome. Rome was politics. But culture and intellect and philosophy and ideas, all of that was in Athens. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Zeno, Epicurus, these are the brilliant minds, the greatest minds really in Western civilization. And they were all part of Athens. And so Paul goes to Athens. And it says he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. So Paul, here's what happened. Paul goes to these cities, and he always starts in the synagogues. He starts by talking to the Jews, but then he makes his way out into the public, and he begins to tell people about Jesus. And in this place, he goes to the marketplace day by day for those who happen to be there. See, what would happen was Socrates and Plato and these guys, when they would get together, they didn't really have schools that they would go to per se. They would be in the marketplace. This was the public gathering place where they would go and they would debate and they would discuss ideas and philosophies. I don't know about you. I was really disappointed this week because I went to Walmart and there was no philosophy going on. Bummed me out, right? I mean, I'm telling you, I would be more inclined to go to Cherry Hill Mall if Plato was holding court in the food court. Like, that would be fantastic. But this is where they would go, the marketplace where you go and you're shopping and you do all this. But can you imagine you're at ShopRite and here's Plato and he's talking to somebody else and they're debating these ideas, and this is how they would wrestle with ideas. It's beautiful, beautiful. I love this. These are my people. And so then here, Paul says, man, I want in on that. I want to be part of this. And so he goes into Athens, he goes into the marketplace. Verse 18, and a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers begin to dispute with him. I love that, getting into it. See, this isn't a Twitter battle. This isn't throwing slogans at each other. This is like debate, This is for real. And some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say to them? In other words, they're like, he's just talking nonsense. It's like he's picking up like different ideas from different places, and they can't make sense of it, and they don't understand it, and they're like, what is this guy talking about? This is nonsense. Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they don't understand what Paul was saying. So in the Greek, Jesus is a proper name. That was clear. But the resurrection actually is the word anastasis. And so it's possible that these philosophers actually thought Paul was talking about two different gods, Jesus and the resurrection. They're like, who are these foreign gods, this Jesus and anastasis that you're talking about? There's no grid for them, this idea of a resurrection. This never crossed their minds, right? Blew their minds. And so in verse 19, then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus. And the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting. The Areopagus is a physical location. It's called Mars Hill. You can go and visit it if you go to Athens, but it also was a council. This was the ruling government of Athens. It's so interesting that Athens was such a cultural and intellectual epicenter that even when it was taken over by Macedonia and then later by Rome, they respected Athens so much they said, hey, keep governing yourselves. Like, we're not even going to interfere. You got a good thing going. Just keep it up. And so the Areopagus, this is the government of Athens, essentially. This is the council. And they would weigh political matters, legal matters, but also ideas, philosophies, religions that would come into town. And they want to make sure that they're on the up and up. They want to make sure that they're good for society. So in verse 20, it says, you are bringing some strange ideas to our ears. I love that. And we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Luke is the person who's writing this, and he sounds kind of dismissive, doesn't he? He's like, oh, they just sit around doing nothing but like collecting ideas. It's probably kind of lost in translation because actually it wasn't an idle thing that they were doing. See, what they understood is that ideas are powerful. They understood that ideas will create or destroy worlds. And if you don't believe that, consider the fact that this Areopagus, this is the same council that condemned Socrates to death for some of his ideas. And so they're not casually inviting Paul, hey, come share some of your theories and we'll just talk about them and debate them and just for fun. No, these are ideas and you don't mess around with ideas. And so they're inviting Paul to come and give a defense, give an account of what he's sharing so that they can decide what to do with him. So they invite him in, and I love this. They say, Paul, you're bringing some strange ideas to our ears. There's an understatement. Have you thought about how strange Christianity sounds? You know, see, some of us, we've been in the church for so long, and we just sort of go, yeah, Christianity. We believe in this God who's three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Nothing weird about that. And try to explain the Trinity sometime. And one of those persons, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, he comes to earth and becomes fully human, lives as a Jewish carpenter. And then what does he do? He dies for the sins of the world and is raised to life. Yeah, totally normal. Now, see, it's really strange. It's really strange. Well, just say it out loud sometime. Not in church. That's cheating. Not in your small group, not in your family gathering, over dinner. No. Go into the public space and sit down with somebody like I did recently. I got to sit down with a guy and I got to share the gospel with him and tell him about Christianity. And as I'm saying it out loud, I'm thinking, this is the craziest thing. It's totally crazy. And yet it's so true. But see, it sounds so strange to the ears of our world today. And see, I think this is one of the reasons why it's become increasingly difficult to believe in the God as he's revealed in Scripture. See, it used to be, in Paul's day, it was strange. They're like, we have no idea what we're talking about. They have no grid for what he is explaining to them. But see, then over time, Christianity takes over Western civilization. It becomes the predominant belief system and worldview. But we've come almost full circle. We're back to a place where it sounds strange in our society. It sounds weird to our society. Just say it out loud in public sometime. And we need to recognize that. Not so that we can be embarrassed by it, but recognize that it didn't stop Paul. In fact, there's actually great strength in something that people no longer know and are no longer familiar with, because then they might be a little bit more inclined to say, explain that to me. See, we live in a society where it used to be that Christianity, at least in a superficial sense, was taken for granted, but we live in a free marketplace of ideas. There are so many competing ideas, ideologies, philosophies, religions, and nothing has the upper hand. It's all just kind of a mishmash. And it's out there, and the question is, as we are faced with all of this onslaught all the time, it begins to press in, and we start to think, well, if I believe in this, but why don't I believe in this? And I believe in this, but actually now I'm kind of thinking about this. And the reality is that over time you realize that in this secular society in which we live, Christianity doesn't get top billing. And so we actually have to wrestle with ideas that we never thought we'd wrestle with. And we have to decide what we're going to believe. Even if you grew up in the church, even if everybody in your family for generations have been a Christian, you still have to choose what you're going to believe. One of my friends out of college grew up in a Christian home, and I remember this conversation. We sat down and he said, Lucas, I'm not sure I can stay a Christian. And I said, okay, explain this to me. And he said, well, I kind of imagine it like putting on a hat. He's like, when I put my Christian hat on, he was like, now I'm a Christian, and I see the world as a Christian, and it all makes sense to me. He said, but I've learned that I can take that hat off, and I can put a different one on. How do I know which hat to wear? See, we don't live in a society that is a Christian society, if we ever did. We live in a free marketplace of ideas, just like the Athenians. And I think for some people, this is disturbing. Right? I think for some Christians and some who have been in part of the church, there's this sense of like, oh no, what have we lost? I got to tell you, I'm not all that concerned, because I think a lot of what we've lost built a very false sense of Christianity. I think it built a very false sense of cultural Christianity. But we are back to a place now that, again, we have to choose. What are you going to believe? And this is going to be Paul's question for them. Who will you believe? How are you going to choose? See, I got to be honest with you. I actually really like new ideas. I know that's a shock. If you got to know me at all, I was a philosophy major. Like I said, these Athenians, man, they're my people. Let's talk. Let's debate. Let's discuss. Let's wrestle with new ideas. I love to think. I do. I just do. Is that okay? It's not because I'm brilliant. It's because I have to really work at it to keep up. And there's times when I get up in the morning, my favorite thing, one of my favorite parts of the day, I get up, I make my coffee, and I go we've got this great sunroom, and I can look out the backyard, and I sit there with my coffee, and I'll read some verses, and then I just think. And I just sit there. And my kids come in one by one, and I wonder, what do they think that I'm thinking about? How weird do I look right now? Just thinking. See, I like this. Let's think. Let's go deep. Let's wrestle with ideas. I'm all for that. The danger is that we stop thinking. The danger isn't that we think too much. The danger is that we stop thinking. The danger is that we stop thinking and we start adopting whatever the latest trend is. See, there's a bias towards the latest thing, isn't there? It's always the latest thing. The latest thing is always the greatest thing. Have you ever had an opinion and you thought, man, I'm convinced of this, and then you heard somebody else and you're like, well, you know what, that's convincing, and now I kind of think of it like this, and then here's somebody else and you're convinced of this, and pretty soon you've gone from here to there and you don't even know how you got there. You just sort of woke up one day. I got to tell you, as a society, we have moved places in the last 10 years, and I don't think anybody has any real clue how we got here. See, we're not being critical thinkers. The problem isn't that we're thinking too much. The problem is we're thinking too little, and we just sort of adopt the latest thing like it's the latest fashion. You know, I had a buddy in high school, and we loved this guy. It was kind of funny. It was kind of sad, but you could tell which group of friends he was hanging out with at that time, because he would suddenly dress like them and talk like them and kind of have their attitude and so forth. And he was kind of a chameleon. It was like, oh, he's hanging out with that group, and then a few weeks later, oh, no, he's hanging out with that group. See, I think as a society, as a people, this is what we've become like. Whatever the latest fashion trend is, the thought trend that we put on like new clothes, and we just keep adapting and changing and moving, and we don't know how we got from here to here, but it's the latest thing, and this is what we're going to wear now. And see, it is not cool. In case you were wondering, it is not cool to be a Christian. It's not cool to believe in the God that you read about in the Bible, the God that you hear in Sunday school, the God that you hear on a Sunday morning, the God that you're going to hear about at church. That's not cool. There's nothing in vogue about that. In fact, it's just the opposite. I mean, what's cool now is to be enlightened and to realize just how childish Christian faith really was. What's become in vogue, and you'll hear people talk about this, is that they grow out of their faith. This was this childish thing that I used to believe, but now I have discarded that childish faith, and now I have stepped into maturity, enlightenment. I am an adult because I have the courage to see the world as it truly is, a world without meaning, without God. And so now it is up to me to ascribe and to create whatever meaning exists. And see, the way the story is so often told, and it's so subtle, but we hear it all the time, is that there's the spiritual journey that you go on where you discard all the things that were childish, and now you step into mature adult enlightenment to have the courage to see the world as it is without God. But all you've really done is you've exchanged one faith for another. Because all you've done is exchanged one story where God is the hero for a story where you are. See, faith it's not optional. See, if you're sitting there telling yourself, well, I don't really believe in anything, sure you do. You can't not believe. If you are a human being and you exist, then you have placed your faith in something. You are trusting in something. You are believing in something. You have a framework and a worldview through which you see the world, whether you realize it or not. In fact, oftentimes the power of that worldview is that it's invisible. You don't even know that you have it. I don't believe in anything. Sure you do. Sure you do. See, this is just what the Athenians were doing, though, right? They had their different worldviews. Just like we live in a free marketplace of ideas, we're picking and choosing, and we decide, I'm going to believe this or I'm going to believe this. The Athenians were looking and investigating and discussing different ideas and deciding, what will we believe today? And it's into this space, then, that Paul stands up in the Areopagus, and he says, let me tell you about the God you don't know. In verse 22, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now what you worship as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. I think it's so interesting that even though we live in such a skeptical and disbelieving society, that we are still such religious people. And we can't escape it. We might not worship in churches, but we worship somewhere, and we worship something. It might not be God, but there is something that we believe in, that we worship. I don't know if you saw, but this week there was an announcement put out by Apple. It's a big announcement, and my kids were showing it to me. I watched some of the video, and they were announcing their latest iPhone and their latest smartwatch and their latest AirPods, and it was over an hour and a half long for those three things. Wrap your head around that. And the reason is because as I watched this video, it has such an air of devotion. I mean, this technology, it's godlike. I mean, even the language that's used, it integrates seamlessly into your life, to every part of you. It knows what you're thinking before you do. It can save you from accidents or dial 911 for you. It knows what's happening in your life, and it'll help your life, and it'll fix your life, and it will be all that you need it to be. It is omniscient. It knows everything about you. It is omnipresent. It's everywhere that you go. This technology is omnipotent. It can change your life. Is it a phone or is it God? See, it is nothing less than worship. And don't get me wrong, I use Apple products. But see, it's so ingrained in us to worship. We are religious people. We can't help it. just like the Athenians. And they even worship a God they don't know, just in case. I love this. So Paul says, listen, I see an altar to an unknown God. There are some historical accounts, and we can't verify this for sure, but there was a plague that hit Athens. And so they worshiped, they went to all their gods, and they did sacrifices, they did everything that they knew to do, and the plague did not go away. And so somewhere along the line, someone had this brilliant idea and said, wait a minute. What if there's a God we don't know? Maybe we should worship that God. Maybe that God has the power to end the plague. And so they created an altar to the unknown God, and wouldn't you know it, the plague goes away. And so they kept this altar to the unknown God. They continue to worship and sacrifice to a God that they did not know. And so here Paul is saying, let me tell you about the God that you know that you don't know. See, this sense that they have, that there is a God that they don't know, see, we haven't changed that much. There's a sense in which we are still looking, all of us. There's something within us that is longing for the God, whether we know him or not. There's a sense that we are haunted by the sense of the transcendent, right? It's all around us, this feeling that we have that there is something more than the reality that we can see and taste and touch and smell and hear, beyond our senses, beyond the material world. There is something with meaning, something that exists. And we want to know desperately what it is. It haunts us. It's in our music, in our art, in our stories, our relationships, our greatest joys, our worst tragedies. It's there. It's right behind, and we can't quite get it. We desperately want to know what it is. And for some people, that's as far as they're willing to go. And they would like to keep the unknown God unknown. Maybe some of you, you're here and you're like, yeah, I kind of know this God, but I don't really know him. And it's easier to keep the unknown God unknown, isn't it? Because then he doesn't mess with your life too much. Then he doesn't ask anything of you. And see, the Athenians, they want to juggle beliefs, but I'm not sure if they want to know this God. And Paul says, well, I'm going to tell you about him anyway. I'm not going to give you any choice. Let me tell you about the God you know you don't know. Verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. God says, listen, you didn't create this God. You didn't imagine this God. You didn't invent this God. And this God is not dependent upon you like all those other idols. Like, you had to make those idols. You got to upkeep those idols. You got to bring things to those idols. And you got to keep those idols happy by giving them all the things that they need. And he says, listen, let's flip that on its head. You didn't create this God. This God created you. And he's not dependent upon you. You are dependent on him. Verse 26, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. See, Paul is describing for them a God that they have never imagined before. The Epicureans believed in a whole host of gods, but they believed that those gods never interfered with humanity. They were just at a distance. But this God, he makes out of one man every nation of men, and he determines the time set for them in the exact places where they should live, so that people will see him and seek him and know him. He's not far off. The Stoics, their idea of gods was more like pantheism. God was part of the natural order. But see, this is a God who creates the world and everything in it. This is a God who is outside of the natural order, who creates it and breathes life into it. And just in general, the way that people viewed gods in the ancient Near East was that gods were tyrannical. You existed to serve them, to meet their needs. Gods were lazy. They didn't like to work hard, so they created humans to do all the work that they didn't want to have to deal with. But here is a God who creates you and says, you can't do anything for me. I don't need you. I didn't create you so you could do that. You got nothing I need, but I want you. I love you. See, this is a God that they've never imagined. And Paul, he is saying, listen, I know you have all these gods. I've seen all the idols. Stop believing in them and instead choose to believe in the God who is. Have you ever wondered if you're living in a computer simulation? Not the question you're probably expecting right this moment, but just bear with me. Have you ever wondered, like, how do we know this is real? Some of you are like, oh no. See, there's a question that actually is gaining momentum right now. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a growing body of literature that is discussing and speculating, could this all be a computer simulation? And we just exist in some sort of a supercomputer somewhere. We've been programmed and everything kind of deterministically. And I sort of laugh at this because if you read philosophy, you know that Descartes was ahead of this by about 400 years. And he didn't have a computer, in case you're wondering. See, Descartes, he was famous for what's called Cartesian skepticism. And he was just asking the same question. How do we know that this is real? How do we know this is really what's going on? And so he speculated. He said, what if this is a dream? What if we were to wake up at some point and discover this was all just because you've had some realistic dreams, haven't you? He said, what if this is a dream? Or what if, his language, what if there's an evil demon? And the evil demon has control of all of this, and he's controlling all of this, and he is deceiving us into thinking that this is the real world, but we have no idea. By the way, if you want to know the plot of The Matrix, this is Descartes, okay? Are you living in the Matrix? Is this a computer simulation? So here's the bad news, maybe for some of you. I can't prove to you that this isn't a computer simulation. Don't freak out. I can't prove it to you. Any more than I can prove that this isn't a dream, any more than I can prove that we're not living in the Matrix, or that your mind isn't in a vat somewhere and someone's just putting all these stimulation into your head, making you think this is happening when it's really not. I can't prove any of this to you. Just like I can't prove to you that God exists. See, at the end of the day, you still have to choose what you believe. And you can choose to believe that maybe all of this is just an accident. Maybe you are the result of impersonal evolutionary forces that just brought all of this together, and we're going to be here for a few more million years, and then we'll all be gone when the sun burns up. Or you can choose to believe that this is a computer simulation, or that some other worldview that you choose, but you can also choose to believe in a God who created you, who knows you, and loves you. And that all of this is real because he has made it real. Have you ever looked at a painting and you wondered, what does this mean? You ever see like a Jackson Pollock painting, in the museum, and it's like all this paint splatters and dots, and it just looks like nonsense to me. I'll be honest, I'm not sophisticated. I'm willing to admit this publicly. But I look at it, I'm like, I don't know what this means. See, it would be but it's a valid question, isn't it? Because somebody intentionally made that painting. What does it mean? If you're as a person, we are created to intentionally create meaning, whether we intend to or not, in one sense. Like we can't help it. It's built into the very fiber of our being as creators. Like we create, and therefore it has meaning. But it would be a really silly question if there was something that somebody accidentally tripped and splattered paint across. And I said, well, what does that painting mean? And they could be all, snooty about it, be like, whoa, it means that the world is chaos. And when I tripped, it meant this, and it meant that the world moves in mysterious ways, and the paint splat like this. And so, no. You can't say that. At that point, you are reading meaning into what has happened. You didn't create that. That was just an accident. So you're interpreting meaning. You are ascribing meaning that is not intrinsically there. See, for meaning to exist in a deeper level, the meaning of a painting, it requires intentionality. You can't have meaning without intention. And so if you want to believe that your life has meaning, deep meaning, if you want to believe that love is real, the love that you have for the people in your life, the beauty is real, that it's not something that's just a matter of aesthetics and how it hits your eye and stimulates your brain, that there is truth, that there's justice. If you want to believe those things have real meaning, then there has to be intention behind it. There has to be a creator. There has to be an author. There has to be a God. See, I can't prove to you that God exists, but I want you to see that you want him to. See, I don't know about you. I believe with every fiber of my being that life matters, that life has meaning. And it's not meaning that I have ascribed to my life. It's meaning that exists. It is intrinsic to life itself. In the same way that I believe that love is real. I believe that love is more than just the chemicals and hormones and synapses in my brain that trigger when I see my kids or I see my wife. No, love is more than that. Love is real. I can't explain it to you. That's part of the beauty of love. But it's beyond the material. It's so much more than that. See, I can tell you that I have so much confidence in that because someday I'm going to die. I know, you're crushed. And I'm still wrestling with that. I'm going to die, but here's the thing. As a Christian, you know what I know? My soul will continue to live, and I will still love my kids. And I won't have any synapses or chemicals or hormones in my brain, but I will still love my kids, and I will still love my wife. I will still love the people in my life. And someday, the hope is, Jesus is going to raise me back to life. And then I'll have a body again, but see, that love, it's not just a physical manifestation that I interpret as love. No. That love is real. See, if you want to believe that love is real, and you're looking for love that has meaning beyond, just how you're wired, it's just some chance, but intention, that type of love. If you're looking for beauty and truth, and see, we all are, then those are the breadcrumbs that point you home. And you are closer than you think. So he closes with this amazing argument, verse 29. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. Again, you didn't make this God. He made you. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. Remember when you were a kid and you would do something or claim to do something and you'd be like, I dunked a basketball, and your friends are like, prove it. Or you make some sort of outrageous claim, and then we did this. And they're like, oh yeah, prove it. See, this is kind of like what God is inviting us to ask him, which it seems really bold, doesn't it? I mean, can you imagine going before the God of all the universe and saying, okay, God, prove that you exist. Let's see it. And yeah, God doesn't strike us dead. Instead, God says, I'm going to condescend to you. In fact, I love you so much, I'm going to give you the proof that you need. He says, I'm going to prove that I exist to you. This is the proof that is indisputable. You can't argue with it. I'm going to raise Jesus from the dead to prove that he is exactly who he claimed to be, that I have raised him in power to new life. And that, by the way, he wasn't just raised from the dead in some sort of spiritual sense. Like, he physically rose from the dead, and he was seen by over 500 people. And it transformed the course of human history. It took people who were scared and running for their lives and suddenly turned them into the most bold speakers of the gospel the world has ever known. And they went to be martyred, all because they saw Jesus risen from the dead. God says, if you want proof that I exist, look at Jesus. Top that. Good luck. See, I don't know about you, but if someone claims to be God, as Jesus did, and then he predicts his own death and his resurrection, and then he does it, I'm going to take him at his word. Call me crazy. Albert Camus was a French philosopher, and he saw the world, I think, with remarkable clarity in so many ways. He's kind of a depressing person, though, because he saw the reality that the world is such a disappointment. See, what Camus recognizes that there's something within us that we long for love, but we long for love that doesn't end. We long for a beauty that is beyond measure, that transcends. We long for truth that is absolute truth, for meaning, for purpose. And he says, we long for all these things. He says, but the world doesn't satisfy. The world never comes through. It's like the universe is pulling this horrible practical joke on us. It's like we have all of these things within us, and the universe chuckles and says, yeah, you're never going to get any of that. And so Camus spent his life in depression because this is how he saw the world. He saw one side of it. This is what we long for, but the world was never enough. He called it the philosophy of the absurd. But it's interesting because C.S. Lewis, if you know his story before he became C.S. Lewis the thinker, the Christian thinker and apologist, his story is that he was an atheist. And he was brilliant, though. He was a man who taught classics at Oxford and Cambridge, not a slouch. And in teaching classics, teaching these epic poems, this epic poetry like the Fairy Queen, he fell in love with the idea of love and of beauty and of meaning, of transcendence, of truth. And yet he saw that same problem that Camus saw. He said the world does not live up to this. The world fails in every single way. And he was hopeless and he despaired and he was an atheist until he realized and he saw that in Jesus, he saw the greatest, the most beautiful, the most loving, the most real act in all of human history. And when Jesus goes to the cross and he dies for our sins and he rises from the dead and he ascends into heaven to give us the hope for eternal life, that in that, he says, there it is. There's the beauty you've been longing for all of your life. There's the love you've needed to know that you matter all of your life. There's the truth that you have been looking for all of your life. It is in Jesus that is the point of intersection between all that we've hoped that the world would be meets reality. And Jesus, the greatest longings of our souls, meet God. And maybe you're here this morning and you're not sure exactly what you think about God. You're not totally convinced that this God exists. It seems maybe kind of trite, kind of like bedtime stories, but see, if you are looking for love that never ends, if you are looking for beauty beyond measure, if you're looking for truth, true truth, as Francis Schaeffer called it, deep meaning truth, then you're not looking for meaning you can create. You're not looking for gods that you can invent. You are looking for the God who exists. And if you're looking, you're closer than you think. See, we need a reality check. I got to tell you, we need a reality check. Because we know that. We know who God is. If you've given your life to Jesus, then you know this God who exists, who created you, who knows you and loves you, and yet we live in a world that is groping around in the darkness. We live in a free interchange of ideas in this marketplace, and people have no idea where to start and no idea where to go. And yet here we are, and we actually know the God who exists. And so we need a reality check, because if we've gotten lost in our discouragement, if we've gotten lost in our despair, if we've gotten lost in our hopelessness, that we are no longer able to step into that space and to proclaim the God who exists, that you can know him, then we have lost our way desperately. And we got to get back on track. We need to be woken up to the reality of God ourselves so that we can step into that space and say, let me tell you about the God who is. See, listen, do you believe that this morning? Like, do you believe that God exists? I hope this is kind of a reality check, maybe for even where you are, your space right now. Because I'm telling you that it doesn't matter what you are going through in your life. God exists. That should change your paradigm of how you understand your life. Listen, I get life is hard. Believe me, I get it. I get that life is tragic in ways. But see, God knows everything that's going on in your life. Do you know that God knows the illness that you're battling? God knows the situation at work that you're battling. God knows the relationships that are fractured in your life. God is dealing with all of that. He knows all of that. And God exists, and he is still the God in heaven who reigns over all of it. Do you know that? Come on, people. You got to help me out here. Like, do you know that God exists today? See, we need a reality check, and we're going to step into the world and be the hope that the world wants and is desperately looking for. Like we have the hope that the world's looking for. We got the love that the world's looking for. We got the future that the world is looking for, and they're grasping around, going, what do we grab hold of? What do we grab hold of? What do we create for ourselves? And we're sitting there going, man, I'm with you. I'm so discouraged. I'm so despairing. I'm in hopelessness. Man, God forgive us if we don't have a reality check and step in with a completely different attitude. Like, we got to look different from everybody else, or we're not doing what God has called us to do, and we're not who God has called us to be as the church. Guys, we need a reality check. And I hope this morning it just gives you like a little figment of like, this is a God who exists and you can know him. Do you know he exists? And if you have given your life to him, he exists in you. Like he is living within you. Like what excuse do we have if we find ourselves in there going, man, I give up. This world's a hopeless place. God doesn't think so. Jesus says, man, take hope. I've overcome the world. Where is our hope? Right? We got to have that. We got to step into that space. And see, this is why we come on Sundays. This is why we get in small groups. This is why I do community, because I don't always feel that. Man, I don't always feel hopeful, but man, what I want is people in my life to say, man, how you doing? Man, I'm down, I'm struggling. Man, I hear you. By the way, God exists. Oh, yeah. Thanks for that. I need a reality check because I kind of lost my way for a minute. So we need the reality check so we can be who God has created us to be and who God has called us to be as the church, to step into the world and offer hope for a better future and ultimately for eternity. Let me pray. God, we love you. And yet it's so easy to get so caught up in life and to forget that you're even there. And I get it. Man, life is hard. Life is painful, and there is struggle, and there is, stuff that people are walking through right now in this room that I can't even imagine. And yet, God, you have always been faithful. You are with us every step of the way, and part of it is just beginning at this place of recognizing that you are there. You exist. You created us. You know us. You love us. Let that begin to sink deep into our souls and transform our minds and to change the way that we see the world and see our circumstances as another way that we can bring you glory, even in the worst. Because you've never failed us. You've never failed us. God, lead us into the world today to be the people that you've called us to be the church that you've called us to be, to reach the people who are so desperately longing for hope. And they're looking for love, and they're looking for beauty, and they're looking for truth, and we can say, hey, I know right where to find it. Man, I know him. This God who you don't know and you know you don't know, I know him. And I want you to as well. God, give us that boldness. Amen.